Page 17. Baiting Intent. On that day, we met by the Palace of Fine Arts in Mexico City. Carlos told me he was looking for some rare books and asked me to accompany him to second-hand bookshops. We crossed the park and walked in silence through the streets of the historic center in the direction of the Zocalo. He entered all second-hand bookshops along the way, but in the end didn't buy anything. I don't normally have private conversations with people, he said out of the blue. But with you, it will be different. I asked him to what I owed the privilege. The winds favor you, Carlos replied with an enigmatic smile. Not satisfied with his answer, I insisted on knowing why I should merit the privilege. He wouldn't answer me, replying evasively that one day we would discuss the subject. While browsing through some books, I suddenly felt Carlos grab me by the arm while pointing at a shelf. You see? His face was the picture of indignation. I couldn't see anything. There, he exclaimed, indicating a cluster of books. I focused my eyes and saw his name on the cover of a book called A Separate Reality. The reason for his outburst appeared to be that the book had been classified as fiction. While we browsed through contemporary poetry, I said that I loved listening to stories about sorcerers, and that I'd be delighted if he'd tell me some. On hearing my request, Carlos looked at me with shining eyes and an expression of sudden recollection. Then, in a dramatic tone, he whispered, I'm charging you with a task. He told me he had a job to do for which he needed some information, but his busy schedule left him no time to look for it. Staring fixedly at me, he said, Maybe you could help me. I remember the intensity of his look, so powerful that I felt confused for a moment. But then he turned away from me and began examining the books on one of the shelves. The theme of the gaze is recurrent in Carlos's works. It is a technique with which a sorcerer stops the internal dialogue of another person instantly and forcibly. Once I have recovered from his look, I told Carlos I'd be very happy to help. His face lit up, and, with a big smile, he replied, Since you are going to be a journalist, he was referring to my studies, I'd like you to go to the world of ancient seers and get them to tell you their stories. A reportage of power. That's what I require from you. Carlos' request took me by surprise. I didn't know what to make of it, and even began to think he might be joking. The sound of his voice was serious, but there was an air of mischief in his eyes. I tried to find out more about the supposed task, but Carlos said it was neither the time nor the place to discuss such matters. His answer filled me with curiosity to find out what he had in mind. On another occasion, while sitting with Carlos on a bench in Alameda Central Park, I took the opportunity to bring up the subject of my task. He said, "What I'd like you to do is go to the world of the ancient seers and ask them a series of questions. I'll prepare a list later and give it to you. But you must take care," he went on, "because they are wicked sorcerers, dark and living in a perpetual state of war, and they will try to kill you. To survive, you'll have to offer them something that interests them. Making them listen will be your only chance of escaping in one piece." "And what can I offer them?" I asked, trying to hide my fear. "They are only interested in expanding their egos. They are so full of self-importance that they have focused all their evil deeds of sorcery on that particular goal, entering worlds of a nature that makes them seek at any cost the type of energy that is most suitable for supporting their insatiable egos. To attract their interest, you must offer them something that inflates their self-importance to unimaginable levels. Something like a cult, which would be guaranteed to nourish it. You must convince them that they will gain more by letting you go than keeping your energy. Promise them a reportage in which they and their stories will play central part. If you succeed, you might come to an agreement with them." "Why in the form of a cult?" I asked. "Is there no other way?" "Yes," Carlos replied. "Letting yourself be caught. Those sorcerers have developed the morbid aspects of their personalities, such as the taste for ritual, fixations, devotion, and self-pity. Their character has a tendency towards what might be described as mystical. It is their desperate attempt to restore their unity. The only way to win their favor is to present them with edifices even more morbid than those they already worship, so that they see the momentary sacrifice of energy as an investment that will disproportionately enhance their future possibilities. Ritual and religious behavior is the only way to produce the amount of energy those aberrations require in order to achieve their dark goals." Carlos's words shook me. I was suddenly struck by deep terror, while at the same time my curiosity was aroused. In those days, my convictions oscillated between three different directions. My family's Christian beliefs, the school-learned scientific approach, which carried considerable weight, and also certain Oriental ideas that had begun to interest me greatly. Jokingly, I said that I didn't have the time machine I'd need to complete the task. Carlos patiently replied that I didn't need to travel through time to visit the ancient seers, since they existed today. Seeing my puzzled expression, he explained, calling seers new or old is just a way to distinguish between categories of sorcerers. Don Juan considered the new seers to be the ones engaged exclusively in the fight for freedom. The new seers stopped fiddling around with the fine points of tradition and went straight to the source. That doesn't mean that there aren't many sorcerers out there who still follow the old ways. You can learn a lot from them. In the world of sorcerers, nothing comes free. If you want tales of power, go for them. He pushed me gently, as if urging me to run down the street, then patted my shoulder and added, only those willing to take risks can unravel the hidden mysteries of the universe. I was very apprehensive, believing he was sending me on a macabre mission that could indeed involve evil sorcerers. We did not speak of my task for many years. I had, in fact, almost forgotten about it. It was only much later, during one of my recapitulation sessions, that I realized that Carlos had, on that occasion, pointed out a direction to me. It was the very moment when he presented me to intent. Provoking self-importance. My first contact with Carlos's work took place during the key period of my life, while I was still deliberating which concepts to adopt as the guiding ones in my life. When I first met him, I had already read some of his books, but many of the concepts they spoke about escaped me, whilst their meanings seemed to me obscure and provocative at the same time. Carlos's teaching style was unique. His glance alone could arouse a person's self-importance. Some people got so discombobulated in his presence that their ego would explode and they would even become sick to their stomach. I always had a good, friendly relationship with Carlos, although there were periods when we would not see each other or speak to each other at all. It was as if the Nagual wanted to give me a break, a period away from him long enough to give me the chance to absorb his lessons. Carlos strictly demanded that I keep total secrecy about our relationship. threatening to stop seeing me if I failed to meet that demand. His words were clear. Don't say anything to anyone about this. Although at the time I didn't understand the reason for this request, my retiring, solitary nature made it easy for me to comply, providing me with perfect isolation. In addition, Carlos demanded that I take systematic notes of our talks, declaring that one day those notes would prove useful to me. This surprised me as on a number of occasions in his lectures, I heard him say that one shouldn't write anything down. My academic training helped me greatly with that task. I remember how Carlos made fun of people, claiming that they were all hopeless egomaniacs who fell apart at the slightest pressure. Some people, he told me, were so hurt by his words that they would depart angrily and end up slandering him. It was fun to watch Carlos collapse with laughter as he repeated the barbarity they would say. He was particularly bothered by people who, in his opinion, distorted his teachings. He told us, for example, how a Mr. Sanchez shamelessly exploited his Carlos' name and had been organizing courses based on his books as far as the state of Hidalgo in order to profit. Carlos even hired lawyers to sue those who used his name improperly or quoted his writings without permission. He claimed that ideas were magical property of those who possessed them and ought to be respected. Carlos said we had to be grateful he was so patient and methodical when explaining the knowledge of the sorcerers. Had we been in Don Juan's hands, he said, he'd have been sure to put us in a sack and thrash us until we learned the lesson, that we simply had no time at all. I was curious about the way Carlos sometimes commented on other people's affairs in such detail that I wondered how he could know those things with such certainty. When I asked him if he had spies among his followers, he replied that, although indeed many people informed him about what was going on, his certainty came from another direction. He said he was able to perceive the thoughts of others, and that the dreaming emissary told him everything about any person on whom he focused his attention. I asked Carlos if he knew my thoughts. Seeing my look of apprehension, he smiled and jokingly said that I was a soul in love. I blushed like a child caught doing something illicit. Carlos also told me of people who would approach him so they could boast they knew a celebrity. They were easy to recognize, as the first thing they did was ask for his autograph. Others tried to use their relationship with him to attract followers to their own schools. There were also those who came in the hope of being discovered and recognized by him as his successors. I would have fits of laughter watching him mimic their begging doggy eyes which said, "Here I am, please look at me," as if, when I failed to realize how wonderful they were, they'd get angry and go away, spreading slander not just about me, but about all of us, he said, referring to his cohorts. The only external help we can have. Once, as we discussed my possible commitment to the path, Carlos said, "Self-pity and self-importance are the real tyrants. They prevent people from seeing things clearly. Therefore, if you really want to do something for yourself, start fighting those enemies right now, today." But how can I do that? By being deliberate, staying alert, and being aware of every act, every thought, and emotion that assaults you, by stalking yourself tirelessly, and by not giving in to your vices. He went on. If you begin now, you will have taken your first big step. True, it can take you years of struggle, but at least you won't be inert. By my various vices, he meant the concessions we all make to ourselves when we say things like, "I cannot live without that," or "I'll allow myself the luxury of this," or our old excuse when we tell ourselves, "I deserve this." To be aware of one's every thought, word, and action is undoubtedly a huge challenge, but I accepted it. He had been right. It took me years of work. For me, the process was gradual. When I finally realized that my actions were no longer based on self-pity, I felt I had truly cast off a heavy burden. The most incredible thing, however, was that previously I did not even notice it was there. This task is really a 24-hour-a-day battle. The warrior fights against himself, against his self-importance and self-pity, and is ultimately the battle against his own stupidity. To win it, one must focus oneself at all times, not to relax one's vigil and to sustain round-the-clock awareness. Since, if one lowers one's guard for a single moment, one loses protection against the onslaughts of the ego. Now I understand what Carlos meant when he said that one had no need of teachers. He maintained that fighting self-importance was like going to the toilet, something one had to do on one's own, since it was a strictly personal business. The struggle was against one's own ego, and no one could help us with that. The only external help our peers can, perhaps, provide is to make us aware of our weakness. That, however, gives rise to a new problem. We often see those who warn us of our faults as adversaries or enemies, when in fact we should be grateful to them, for they are our benefactors. Page 27. Beckoning intent. In one of our chats, Carlos and I raised the topic of intent. I took the opportunity to ask him what it really was. He replied, "It is not possible to speak about this topic, not because I wouldn't want to, but because any verbal representation one could come up with would be inadequate for the task. It's like eating ice cream. It must be experienced directly, and there is no way of describing it." "Perhaps you could tell me then about the method of calling intent," I insisted. "There are as many ways as there are practitioners. It seems to connect with every individual in a unique way, but sorcerers have discovered that, yes, in fact, ways of beckoning intent do exist." "How do they beckon intent?" "By being impeccable, but that's not saying much, is it?" He looked at me, smiling ironically as if to say, "I've already been there." Sorcerers are used to acting with complete detachment and generosity. This is one way of making oneself available to intent. The other is to move the eyes in order to communicate with the spirit. How do they move the eyes? Don Juan taught me many exercises, which I've already mentioned in my writings. Haven't you noticed? I didn't know what he was talking about, so I asked him to give me an example. In my books, for example, I describe the methods of rolling the eyes to intend a change, squinting to intend non-ordinary perception, and half closing them to intend inner silence, and other things of similar kind. Once he mastered every single one of these exercises, the warrior's eyes acquire a singular shine, a sensation that is difficult to describe and needs to be experienced personally. With that sensation, one beckons intent. Page 29. Efficiency and efficacy. In the course of another conversation, I told Carlos that I had started a regime of rising at 5 o'clock in the morning, taking a cold shower, and then do the exercises he had taught us. I thought Carlos would congratulate me on this achievement, but he did not welcome my news, saying that all I was doing was putting myself in danger of catching pneumonia. He added, "What you're doing is neither very efficient nor very effective. Forcing yourself in this fashion will achieve nothing, which means you are wearing yourself out to no purpose." I felt he was threatening my routines, so I tried to change the topic. I told him that the terms efficiency and efficacy he had just used seemed redundant to me. He then explained that for sorcerers, it is very important not to confuse the means with the ends. Superficially, the two concepts seem to refer to the same thing, but they don't. In practice, they are separated by an abyss, and the narrow passage across that abyss is the impeccability of the warrior's path. The warrior's path is an art of balance. Efficacy is the achievement of our aims. Efficiency, on the other hand, is the way of accomplishing that achievement while using the least possible amount of energy. For example, a shaman is efficacious when he succeeds in seeing energy, and he is efficient when that achievement does not waste his whole life, when he uses that power to increase his awareness rather than his self-importance. The ancient seers were very efficient at gathering power. However, they used the gifts they acquired to exercise control over others. When the moment of truth came, they remained caught as prisoners in the world of the inorganic beings, completely defenseless. They were very efficient, yes, but very inefficacious. By learning to stalk, a warrior learns how to refine his levels of efficiency. Every drop of energy counts. Every movement is decisive. The difference between the Toltec warrior artist and the charlatan sorcerer of the streets is that, for the former, the detail is of the utmost importance. The beauty of his art is revealed in every step he takes. For him, life is an exercise in strategy, while that other type of sorcerer becomes so seduced by the idea of efficacy, that is to say, by the attainment of his personal goals, that he throws himself at his objective like a fly at a glass window, and generally does not accomplish anything. His life is not a work of art. The efficiency of the warrior depends on the depth of his commitment to the path. But he must never allow himself to be confounded by understanding. He needs to be patient and accumulate power little by little, like a battery charging slowly. That is the only way he'll be able to resist the blinding effect of clarity. It is common for the apprentice to wonder why his benefactor takes so much time to teach him what he needs to know. Everything seems to be doled out drop by drop. That is so because the apprentice has not yet acquired the patience. He doesn't know that a straight line is not always the shortest way. One handles efficiency by applying the art of stalking. When you've learned to plan every step while thus remaining sufficiently flexible to improvise in an instant, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Learning how to create strategies is of supreme importance on the warrior's path. At a certain stage of my path, I got obsessed with strategies to the point that I avoided interacting with people. And how did you manage to overcome that? I asked. I didn't do anything special. The changes happened by themselves. At a certain moment, I acquired a strange self-confidence. I felt I could do anything I set my mind on. The warrior's goal is to overcome the limits we impose on perception. To achieve this, he uses all the available techniques, enhancing each one by his own determination and creativity. Thus, our greatest achievement is not moving the assemblage point as such, since we do it inconsistently all the time. It is to anchor it in a new position through discipline. That is why I say that efficacy for sorcerer means to achieve control of the dreaming body and then journey into that immensity out there.